But we've spent well over 2 months almost alone in our houses together. And if you're like me in a house of several people, we have 5 people living in our house, sometimes it tests your relationship. And it especially tests your communication skills, right? It really, if there are problems in communication, if there is friction between people, you spend this much time together, and it really brings it out. The Bible gives us every tool that we need. It gives us every tool that we need to get to heaven, but it also gives us every tool that we need to have a happy, productive, satisfying life here on earth. And we spent over 3 months, actually close to 4 months, or over 4 months, talking about the Sermon on the Mount and the very simple, straightforward teachings that teach such deep, powerful truths of Jesus. And a lot of the Bible is like that. And what I want us to look at this morning is 2 verses from James chapter 1 that give us a very simple approach to how to communicate with each other better. But when we think about these verses, when we think about these very simple ideas that God gives us to guide us in how to communicate with each other, I want you to know it's not just about being at home with your family. It's not just about being at work and talking to your employer or your coworkers or to the checkout girl at the grocery store. It's everything you communicate, not just in voice, but written and text and emoji and meme and everything else. Every communication you send should reflect some very simple truths. And I think we see in our culture a tremendous absence of understanding of these truths. And I think about what's going on in our world today. People are sick. I don't know if we've hit 100,000 deaths yet. Last time I saw it, it was over 95,000 deaths just in our country of people from COVID-19. It is a legitimate crisis, a legitimate pandemic that has had an amazing effect on almost all aspects of our lives. And yet, even in such a tremendous crisis, a crisis that I thought one of the good things about it would be that it would bring people together. And it would at the very least, it would be a uniting force. But I think the divide in our country, I think the separation in our country has kept it from uniting us. The separation in our country has proven more powerful than the need and the desperation of this pandemic. And so now, everything about the pandemic is being forced into a political perspective. And so depending on which side of the political divide you're on, depends on not only what you believe about it, but what you say about it. And unfortunately, and I'm going to say this bluntly, unfortunately for a lot of people, what they post on social media about it. And so what they post on social media, oftentimes, most of the stuff that I see posted about the pandemic on social media does not do any good for anybody. It just drives the division further apart. And so when we talk about how to communicate, when we talk about what to say to each other, when we talk about what the Bible says about how we should communicate, remember it's not just face to face. It's not just the people in your house. It's not just the people in your workplace or the people at the cash register. It's everybody you communicate to in any way, all the time. The place where I get my hair cut, I get my hair cut by the same lady who's cut my hair since 1998. So some of you, that may sound like a long time, but it's not that long ago. It's 22 years. But she's a good friend of mine, and so I've remained loyal to her. She's remained loyal to me. Well, her business sent out an email saying, okay, they finally let us open, and we're scheduling people to come back in and get your hair cut. My hair was horrible. And here are the rules. This is the rule. These are the rules that the city has. You have to wait in the parking lot until we come and get you and escort you in. You have to wear a mask. And then when she cut my hair, she took one side off and cut this side, and she took the other side off and cut this side, and put it back on while she cut the top. Well, she told us that one of her customers replied to her email saying that she was back open, saying her family would not be coming because her family was not going to wear a mask. And I didn't see it in the email, but I could hear it in the tone of the email, and I see it written specifically in so much social media that even wearing a mask is a political issue. And some people see it as if I wear a mask, then I'm pro-abortion and I hate President Trump. That's not what it means. But that's what people think it means. That's what people read into it. And I'm not going to wear your mask. You're not going to control me. Other people see it. If you don't wear a mask, then you hate everybody and you wish everybody else would die. Let's see what the Bible says. Look at James chapter 1, beginning verse 19. Look how simple this is. This you know, my beloved brethren, but everyone, let me read that word again. Everyone, but everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak. Everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. For the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. What could be more simple than that? Be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. That means when your spouse says something you don't like, be quick to hear. When your boss says something that's offensive, be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. When your neighbor posts something on social media that you think is the most ridiculous, stupid thing in the world, be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. If the world could just make an attempt at these very simple ideas, not only would our communications be drastically changed, our relationships would be drastically changed. Changed in deep and meaningful ways. One of the biggest problems in practically every problemed relationship is a failure to listen. I heard a story very recently about a man who is giving counseling to men who are in struggling marriages. And the reason he's doing this is because he's divorced. And his wife used to complain to him. His wife used to tell him that she's tired of picking up after him. He would leave his socks on the floor. He would leave his coffee cup beside the dishwasher. He would leave his work materials out on the table in a mess. And she said, I don't like that. Why don't you pick up after yourself? Why are you treating me like a slave? And he didn't change. And she divorced him. And he was heartbroken. And his life was destroyed. And he cried for months. And then he realized that he didn't pay attention to what she was saying. And now he's telling other men, well, you may think she's just harping on you. You may think she's henpecking you. But you better listen to what she's actually saying. Because when she leaves you, you'll be destroyed. The same is true of every other relationship. Listening to the other person is everything. And this word in the New American Standard translates it, be quick to hear. Jesus uses the same word, same exact Greek word in several different places. And it's used in the Gospels when Jesus is on the Mount of Transfiguration and they say, let's build a tabernacle to Moses, Elijah, and Jesus. And God says, this is my beloved Son. Hear ye him. Same word. It doesn't just mean get sound waves into your ear. It means take in the information. It means the same thing as our word hear. It can mean you receive the sound waves, but it also oftentimes means pay attention to. Hearken. Listen. That's Luke 9:35. Luke 16:29. Jesus is telling the story of the rich man and Lazarus, and the rich man says, send Lazarus back to my brothers. And Jesus says, they have the law and the prophets. Let them hear them. He says, no, but if somebody's raised from the dead, they'll listen. Jesus says, if they won't listen to Moses and the prophets, they won't hear a man raised from the same word. Listen, hear, be quick to hear. When you start out with somebody's communication that you don't like, that you don't understand, that doesn't make sense, that seems foolish, that seems nonsensical, go slow. Listen before you speak. Be quick to hear. Quick to listen. What would happen if every time somebody said something that we thought didn't make sense, that we didn't understand? And have you ever thought that? I know a lot of people, especially when it comes to politics, but also when it comes to marriage relationships or other romantic relationships, they often say, how could they think that? How could they think that? How could they believe that's true? How could they not know whatever it is that you know? Right? Anytime you think that, remind yourself that everything everybody does makes sense to them. Everything that everybody believes makes sense to them. And almost everything everybody says makes sense to them. And if you don't understand it, if it doesn't make sense to you, if it seems crazy or stupid or foolish or uninformed to you, instead of speaking, you should listen. You should hear. You should be quick to hear. Quick to listen. Imagine if, instead of telling people why they're wrong, we started asking people what they meant. Imagine if I, as a parent, instead of telling my children why what they had done is wrong, I could stop long enough to ask questions until I had a full understanding of why they did what they did. I can think of many instances in my own life where I wish I had done it. Where I wish I had been quick to hear, stopped and listened before I spoke, before I passed judgment, before I gave the end of the matter. Imagine if children did that to parents. Parents, what would you do if in the middle of your lecture, when you're delivering your lecture to your children, instead of rolling their eyes, your children asked you a question? Your children said, I don't really understand why that's important. What if your children said, well, can you explain to me why you think that's true? It would change the communication a lot. It would change the communication a lot. And the same is true at work. I know people who I disagree with vehemently politically. People that I do not think the way they look at politics is right. But I can tell you, when I talk to them and when I listen to them, their arguments sound a lot different coming out of their mouth than it does in my head. And it also sounds a lot different than it does coming out of my TV from the people who agree with me. They're not as easy to win those arguments when the person on the other side believes them. Now, when the person giving the argument doesn't believe the argument, which is what you get, if you only listen to one kind of political media, you get people telling you what the argument is, who are then telling you why the argument is wrong. Well, then none of the arguments make sense. But when you listen to the person who believes the argument, it's not as nearly as easy to refute. And come to find out, sometimes there are actual reasons behind it. But if you don't listen, if you don't hear, you never know what you don't know. You never know that you don't know. Be quick to hear. Secondly, be slow to speak. Wait before you say anything. The word here could also, instead of being translated slow, could be late. Be late to speak. Let some uncomfortable time pass before you say anything. Give your mind some time to work. Give your emotions some time to calm down. Be late. Be slow. Be hesitant to speak. Don't rush. It's one of our biggest errors, one of our biggest mistakes. But this really reflects the power of the tongue. It really reflects the weight of words. If you're anything like me, some of the worst moments of your life have been what other people said to you. Some of the worst experiences in your life have been words spoken to you or about you. If you're anything like me, some of the worst moments in your life are also words that you have spoken. I can think of more of those than the words that I've heard. Things that I have said that I wish I could take back. I wish I could unsay. Go with me to James chapter 3. James chapter 3 gives the longest discussion in the Bible about the power of the tongue, or the power of words. James chapter 3, verse 1 says, "Let not many of you become teachers, my brethren, knowing that as such we will incur a stricter judgment." I think this certainly is talking about public spiritual teaching, teaching the gospel in a public nature. But I think it's a broad principle that's also included here. If you're going to take it upon yourself to tell everybody else what to think and what to believe, you better be prepared to be held to a high standard. And a lot of people with very, very limited and slanted information are taking it upon themselves to teach everybody else what to believe about a global pandemic. And I think it's the most foolish thing in the world. People who don't have a clue and have made very little effort to educate themselves, have read 2 or 3 things or seen 2 or 3 comments, and then presume to pronounce judgment on the decisions of the world and the decisions of the people who are in charge of studying and knowing and helping. It is extremely presumptuous to condemn and to overrule with no information or precious little information. Verse 2, "For we all stumble in many ways. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able to bridle the whole body as well. Now if we put the bits into the horses' mouths so that they will obey us, we direct their entire body as well." We have some horses out here in the field behind me. And I was standing beside one of them the other day. He's a pretty gentle horse. We're out there, and he just comes walking up. And you put your hand up on his back, up on his shoulders. And I mean, this is an animal that weighs 1,000 pounds, that can run 30 miles an hour, can jump several feet in the air. He's just a powerful ball of muscle and speed. It could trample you. He started to bite me. He was just trying to nibble my clothes, and it scared me. And here's what he's saying. You can take something that's 7 to 10 times your size, far more powerful than you. You put a bit in its mouth, you can get on its back, and it'll go wherever you tell it to go. Because this small little piece of metal in his mouth will direct his whole body. Just a small thing has this huge effect. Look at verse 4. Look at the ships also. Though they are so great and are driven by strong winds, are still directed by a very small rudder, wherever the inclination of the pilot desires. Think about a sailing ship. This is not a ship with electric motors, because they didn't have electric motors when James was writing. Okay? They had oars or they had sails. And so you think of a boat that's driven by winds, driven by sails. Well, how do you guide which way that ship goes? There's a piece of wood, maybe a foot square, foot and a half square, that sticks down in the water, and it comes up from another piece of wood to a handle, and you move that handle, and it moves that piece of wood back, right and left. And so if you move it this way, then the whole ship turns. 100-foot long ship with a 2-foot square piece of wood, that 2-foot square piece of wood decides where that whole ship goes. Small thing has a big effect. Look at verse 5. So also the tongue is a small part of the body, and yet it boasts of great things. Then wait a second, I got another example for you. See how great a forest is set aflame by such a small fire. We sing the song, it only takes a spark. You just take a match and you light a leaf, or you light some dead grass, and you can burn 1,000 acres. You can burn 100,000 acres. You can burn thousands of houses, starting with one small spark. Something small having a huge effect. Now look at his application, verse 6. And the tongue is a fire, the very world of iniquity. The tongue is set among our members as that which defiles the entire body and sets on fire the course of our life and is set on fire by hell. Let me tell you something. You have a piece of hellfire in your mouth, and you can unleash it any time you want to. But you'll seldom do it for good if you do it fast. You have a powerful weapon that can do tremendous damage between your teeth. And now it extends down to your fingertips. And you carry this link to the entire world in your pocket. And you can move your fingers just a few times, and you can set the world on fire. You better be careful. That's what he's saying. This is a powerful thing. Words are powerful. Communication is powerful. It has a tremendous effect. Verse 7. For every species of beasts and birds, of reptiles and creatures of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by the human race. Even back then, they would bring lions and elephants and hyenas and all kinds of things and parade them through the streets. They'd capture them and they would keep them from hurting people, but they couldn't do that to the tongue. They couldn't control what people said. People can't even control what they say. And that's his point. Verse 8. But no one can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil and full of deadly poison. You and I both know that the tongue is a powerful thing. I could say stuff today that would get me fired before tonight. Just words. I could say things, just words today, that would ruin 2 careers in a few seconds. Because words are that powerful. And some of you are driven by the words said to you. Some of you are living lives where you spend years trying to disprove words that were said to you. Some of you are spending years trying to disprove words that were said to you by people who aren't even alive anymore. Because words are that powerful and they last that long. And so, we must be slow to speak. We must be slow to use words because they have a tremendous effect. And the words of some people weigh more than other people. Some people can say something to you and it not have that big of an impact on you. When another person says the same thing to you, and it has a giant impact. I heard a preacher talk about a young lady that he had worked with, and she had had a lot of personal problems, made a lot of mistakes, and done a lot of foolish things. And she got her life back together, getting back on her feet, starting to be healthier and live a more productive life. And he compliments her, and he tells her how proud he is of her, how glad that she's getting it all back together and starting to overcome her mistakes. And she says, I really appreciate that. I wish my dad would say that. Because coming from the preacher, it meant something, but not near as much as it would have meant from her father. You have people like that in your life. People for whom your words weigh the most. And for you dads, there are people in your life, your children, for whom your words weigh the most. Your words weigh more than everybody else's. Be slow to speak. Quick to hear. Think about it. Our words should build up. One of the most challenging verses, one of the most challenging passages in the world, in the Bible, for me, is Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29 says, Let no unwholesome word proceed out of your mouth, but only such a word as is good for edification, according to the need of the moment, so that it will give grace to those who hear. New American Standard, which I use, says as is good for edification. That's what the King James used. A lot of other newer translations, English Standard Version, NIV, and others use the word building up instead of edification. It says, but only such a word as is good for building up or building each other up. And that's the idea. That's what edify means. But it's the idea. The word actually comes from the construction world. So that your words must be designed to build up, to strengthen, to make better. We built a chicken house during the quarantine. It only took us about 9 weeks. We didn't work on it every day, but it took us a while. Using old wood that we just had laying around. But you know what we didn't do? When we got finished, we didn't look at our scraps of wood and you say, you know what, we got this extra wood over here, let's just attach it. You know, if you build a house and your contractor says, well, I got this extra plywood, you don't need to just screw it to the wall? Or I got this extra concrete, you don't need to just wet it and pour it out on your basement floor? You see, you don't add construction materials except where they do good, except when they add something. If you don't like the construction analogy, think about baking a cake. You got all these things that you put in the cake. You don't say, you know what, I think I'll add another couple of tablespoons of salt. Or, you know, the cake is about, it's ready to go in the oven. Let's throw in a couple extra, tablespoons of baking powder. You know, we got it here. Let's just use it. But that's how we look at our words. Well, I thought it, so I should say it. Well, it's true. Just because it's true doesn't mean you should say it. Just because you have it doesn't mean you use it. You only use it when it's helpful. You only use it when it builds up. You only use it when it makes things better. Go back to James chapter 1. Everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. Because the anger of God does not achieve, the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. I'm sorry to harp on the people on social media, but when it comes to Christians, I think there is a real problem out there. And for all of those who are angry, all of those who are pouring out their frustration and their rage at about the government restrictions and about the instructions about social distancing and stuff like that. Let me tell you something. Your being right does not make you right with God. The anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. That's what it says. You should be slow to anger, because your anger, your being right, you're proving that you're right, you winning an argument does not achieve the righteousness that God wants. That's not what God has put you here to do. He's not put you here to win arguments and to show everybody else how right you can be. Do you understand that? You go back to Ephesians chapter 4. We just read verse 29, that no unwholesome word proceed out of your mouth, but only such a word as is good for edification according to the need of the moment, that it will give grace to those who hear. Come down to verse 31. He says, let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving each other, just as God in Christ also has forgiven you. The truth is extremely important. The truth of the gospel, the truth of the Bible is everything. There's nothing more important than that. But the truth of the Bible and the truth of the gospel specifically commands that we avoid anger, that we be forgiving, that our words be seasoned with grace, that our words be tinged with forgiveness, and that we magnify the righteousness of God and never worry about proving ourselves right, but to prove the majesty and the glory of God's truth, which brings forgiveness. And so everything we say to build people up, and sometimes it should be to correct people who are mistaken, to correct people who are wrong, to prevent people who are teaching wrong on purpose from hurting other people. It should always be done with grace, with a desire to build, and never to vindicate ourselves, never to vindicate our own intelligence, never to illustrate that we were right all along. Because the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. Go back to James chapter 1. Look at what he says. Verse 19. But everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. For the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. Verse 21. Therefore, putting aside all filthiness and all that remains of wickedness and humility, receive the word implanted, which is able to save your souls. But prove yourselves doers of the word, and not merely hearers who delude themselves. If you want to prove yourself a doer of the word, you want to prove yourself a person who is genuinely committed to truth, genuinely committed to Christ, genuinely committed to God, then you must be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. It's a big challenge, but it is a brilliant opportunity for followers of Christ to set themselves apart from the world and to show the greatness of God's path and the greatness of God's truth in such sharp contrast to a broken and dying world. I hope we'll do that. If you need help of a spiritual nature, or if you need any help, but especially if you need help of a spiritual nature, if you need to resurrect, for lack of a better word, your relationship with God, if you need to restore your connection to Christ, if you need to make right what has come between you and God, we would love to help you if you'll just let us know about that. If you have never become a part of the body of Christ for the first time, if you have never put Christ on in baptism, if you do not enjoy the forgiveness that Christ makes available, and you're ready to do that, if you understand what His Word asks you to do, you're ready to have your sins taken away by the power of His blood, we will be happy to assist you with that, to do anything we can to help you do that. And we'll take any risk necessary to do that. If you'll just let us know by whatever means you choose, we will be overjoyed to assist. Thank you for listening.